Hello, BookTube. Well, the time has come at last. June on the Range is here for 2025. I've had emails from a number of you over the last week who told me, somewhat shamefacedly, that you could not wait and that you've started reading Westerns early instead of waiting for the 1st of June. A couple of people actually emailed me hilariously and asked if I thought Michael K. Vaughan would be angry with that. Michael K. Vaughan is the creator of June on the Range, and I had to write back to those people and say, well, A, no, he won't be angry, and B, have you ever watched his channel? he's a pretty nice guy. He's not going to get angry with you anyway. So we are now begun on June on the Range for 2025, which is an event, as you can guess from the title, that is designed to celebrate Westerns. The millions and millions of Western novels and short stories that were written during the long heyday when the Western was the king of all genres, other than romance. It was the number one thing in the serials. It was the number one thing in the movies. It was the number one thing in the radio dramas. It was the number one thing in books. And there were an endless number of books, endless, more than anyone could read in a lifetime. So really, for June on the Range, if you don't want to incur the wrath of Michael K. Vaughan, all you have to do is read a Western, and you're fine for June on the Range in the month of June. There are a couple of suggestions. You could read a Zane Grey novel or a Louis L'Amour novel, two of the titanic architects of the whole subgenre, but you don't have to. I will be reading quite a bit of both of those gentlemen in the course of June. I save my Western-related reading for June. I don't do it in the rest of the year, so I overdose on it in June. And I waited dutifully, unlike you eager beavers, I waited until 1 minute past midnight last night to start my June event reading. And I started with a writer that I have read now, thanks to June on the Range, quite a few times. He wrote a little, bright little kid's book of Zorro, which I read. I found a copy and reread it for June on the Range. He wrote a novel, a frontier novel called Many Rivers to Cross. I read that. He wrote a book called The Pistolman, which I read and really liked. Probably this is my 9th or 10th. The author is Steve Frazee, and this may be my 9th or 10th book by him. What I read last night was a tiny little thing called The Alamo. No idea what Gregory Peck is doing on the cover of the book, or who that's supposed to be. But this is the story, the famous story of the 1836 siege of the Alamo fort in Texas, where the American or the Texan forces were completely outnumbered by the forces of Santa Anna. Their fate was absolutely determined when they refused to be led out under halter as victims, as conquered. They were given an offer. I don't know how serious an offer it was. They may have been. Some of the people in the Alamo thought that offer means that we will walk out to our deaths. That might have been true. It could have been true that they would have walked out of the Alamo, surrendered, hands held high, and then been just slaughtered. But maybe not. Either way, they weren't willing to do it for a whole bunch of reasons. They weren't willing to do it, and so they were massacred in 1836. Remember the Alamo. Everyone in there was massacred, especially the three marquee people. There was William Travis, there was Jim Bowie of the famous Bowie knife, and there was Davy Crockett. Those three, by random chance, happened to end up together at the Alamo with their men, and they were all killed. And this Steve Frazee novel is from 1960. And 1960 is also when John Wayne's epic movie about the Alamo came out. If you have not seen John Wayne's movie of the Alamo, you really should. You really should. It's really, really good. Not that every movie by John Wayne isn't really, really good, but his Alamo movie is really, really good. And also, it enters into Hollywood canon because there are very few John Wayne movies in which he dies. And the Alamo, of course, has to be one of them. Even the Duke had a huge ego, but even he wasn't willing to have a script in which Davy Crockett lives. No, instead, the ending is pretty much what you'd expect, and it's very well done. The whole movie is very well done. What I don't know, and maybe some of you out there will know this instead, I don't claim to be an expert on Westerns, despite the fact that I've read a huge amount of them for June on the Range over the years. What I can't figure out is whether or not there's any connection between John Wayne's movie and Steve Frazee's book. Steve Frazee's book is not very long, and he wrote an enormous amount. Oh my God, could these guys write? Oh my God, could they write? Over just a manual typewriter, just pounding it out, probably on a 2x4 at the foot of your bed. Brings me back when I see their books. None of these people have been written about. There've been no good biographies of any of these guys. But when I read their books and see the prolific nature of their writing, I am reminded of those old manual typewriter days. I had those days myself. You get fast on the machine, and then Bob's your uncle. You're good for any amount of words. And so Steve Frazee could easily have seen John Wayne's movie or heard that it was coming out and written a book to go, just to cash in on it. This isn't a long book, and it isn't in any way as complex as other things I've read from this author. He could easily have done that. Did he do that? Did he write this book to cash in? Or did he write this book in connection with John Wayne's movie? Did maybe John Wayne say to him, "Hey, I want a book in bookstores. Can I use yours, or will you write one for me?" I don't really know. I know that this was about what I haven't read everything by this author, but I would imagine that this is about as close to a dull book as Steve Frazee can write. He's very good. He very much knows how to goose a narrative along. But it was a little bit dull. It is the bare minimum that you can do if you're going to write a novel about the Alamo. Some people have written much better novels about the Alamo. I read one that was in verse. I read a history that very much read like a novel, just from start to finish. I've read a lot on the Alamo, and it's an inherently dramatic story. And this is about as low key as I have read in quite some time, probably ever, which surprised me because this author I really like. Again, as with my other June on the Range events that I stocked up on June on the Range events last night from last night's reading, I am not going to succumb to thinking in omen terms. I am not going to do that. My first book for June on the Range 2025 was a little bit dull. I won't say predictable because, of course, an Alamo novel is predictable. But you know what I mean. It was a little bit dull. It was a little bit by the numbers. I am not going to say that that is an omen and that my reading for June on the Range is going to be bad or boring. Nope. I am resisting omens on all fronts for June BookTube events. But that was my first book. That was how I'm kicking off June on the Range, was Steve Frazee's The Alamo, which didn't really do much for me. So I have a couple of routes that I could go tonight. I got a big nonfiction book called Gunfighter Nation that has been calling to me because it seems really meaty, really, really good. There's that. Or I could read another novel, maybe even another novel on the Alamo. Or I could read another Steve Frazee, just to rehabilitate his reputation in my head before I move on to anybody else. I could do any one of those things tonight. It's wide open like chaparral. So I don't know. I won't think about it much. I tend, with BookTube events, when they pile up like this, I tend to spin the wheels more or less impromptu right at the time when it's time for me to pick my books for reading. The only thing that tends to interfere with that is if some new release gets in the way. And I want new releases to get in the way, so that's fine by me. In the Days of Billy the Kid, a fantastic book about the Old West. A side of the Old West that tends to be airbrushed out of stories. That was a little too early. Brian Burroughs' book, The Gunfighters, is right on time for June. I've already read that, but I'll want to read that again. But I don't know. I have no idea. I will also be devoting time to writing a Western, The Killing of Rosie Billing, for Substack. But all that can wait. This is my first thing. It was a tiny little thing. It was like 100 pages long. So it was a less than stellar opening for June on the Range, but I'm hoping for better. We have all month long. So I will wrap this up for now, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.